Thank you. I apologize for being a little late. We had a big parade, as you know, in Illinois to honor our U.S. champions of the Little League. They were so inspiring, these 13 youngsters. They worked so hard, came from behind in so many games, and the parade was really special. And I think it really says to all of us in Illinois, no matter where we live, that one of our most important duties as parents and adults is to raise our kids right. And that certainly happened with Jackie Robinson West Little League. And if Jackie Robinson was here today, and I saw Jackie Robinson play, I actually saw him steal home plate one time. He would be so proud. His widow actually sent a letter to these 13 boys, and she said that her husband, Jack, believed in hard work and teamwork, and that's exactly what they did. And I think it is important that we recognize that. And I also want to thank Rich Giebert, your president, for being here and inviting me to this gathering. I have traveled with Rich to a few countries around the world. We went to Poland when I was lieutenant governor. We went to China as governor and down to Brazil. We've gone also to Mexico on behalf of Illinois agriculture and Illinois economy, and especially our agriculture. As you may know, we have trade offices in these various countries to help promote our agriculture. In the most recent year, our number of agricultural exports have dramatically increased by 31%. Just since 2011, it's about $8.6 billion worth of exports, and we're very committed in Illinois in our Department of Agriculture under Bob Fleiter to make sure that we expand our exports as much as we can to the world markets. And the national average over the last couple of years is about 5%. 31% in Illinois. And I was looking at one of the statistics with the DDGs from our ethanol byproduct. Over $1 billion of our exports have come from just that one product, and I think it shows how important ethanol is to our state. As governor, I believe in ethanol. As you heard earlier, I served as state treasurer, and after that, lieutenant governor, and now governor. I think we have to have a proper renewable fuel standard in Washington, and I have sent a letter to the federal officials with other Midwestern governors in particular to make sure that this standard is, the renewable fuel standard is maintained. We don't want any backsliding in that area, because this is a very important part of our effort to be independent when it comes to our fuel. And I think that we in the Midwest know firsthand all the good things that come from a strong ethanol industry. I think we also have to understand we have to have a strong Department of Agriculture, and we have to have a budget for the Department of Agriculture. Over the last 5 years, when I became governor, we had one governor in jail and another one going to jail. So we had to straighten out a lot of things. And at the same time, we had a very, very serious economic recession in our country. It's called the Great Recession. And it really caused great harm to our state budget. One time we had $9.9 billion of unpaid bills in Illinois. But I believe in fiscal responsibility. Sometimes it's hard to do, but absolutely necessary. And what we've done is we've cut the number of state employees dramatically. We've reduced our budget over and over again in the budget years that I've proposed budgets, and we've reduced the amount of money that we owe by a dramatic amount. We're just about at a 30-day cycle in paying our bills in Illinois. It's far below what it was at its height. And I think it is important to understand for those in agriculture that we must have a governor who is honest with the budget. There are those who will tell you, you can cut this or that tax, but if they don't have a way that it adds up, when we talk about investing in education, investing in public safety, investing in our Department of Agriculture that provides so many jobs to the people of Illinois, then they're not really leveling with the people of Illinois. And I think it's important for a governor to be straightforward and honest with respect to the budget. I think that's the only way to go. I believe a tax system should be based on ability to pay, and that's the only way to go. To have levies that are artificial and new and unfair, service taxes on a variety of new services, I don't think that's a very good way for Illinois to go forward in the economy of the 21st century. Matter of fact, I was in Madison County last night, and I had a chance to visit with a member of the Farm Bureau there, and he said my opponent, he asked him about the sales tax exemption for purchase of farm machinery, what my opponent's position is, and he said he hadn't really thought about that. Well, I can tell you what I've thought about. I think it's a very important part of maintaining in Illinois a economy in our agricultural sector where an exemption is provided for the purchase of farm machinery because that is a competitive advantage that we want to maintain with respect to other states around us, and it also helps our rural and agricultural economy. And there's a clear difference between my position of maintaining that exemption and my opponent who doesn't know what it is. And I think it's important to know what it is. And I think it's important also, I see Phil Nelson is here today, and as you may know, I've gone to the Farm Progress Show over and over again. It's not going to be in Decatur this year, but there is a very big gathering, an agricultural gathering on exports in our state, I believe in October. But I wanted to go every year to the Farm Progress Show that we host because I think it's a very important way to say to the people of Illinois, just like our state fair, both in DuQuoin and Springfield, that we, if you really look at it, in Illinois, our economy, about 40% of it depends on agriculture, agribusiness, and the men and women of agriculture, and we've got to make sure we help them out wherever we can. When I was state treasurer, I understood how important access to credit was for all of those in agriculture. We have, I think, about 77,000 farms across Illinois. Forget how many million acres are farmed in our state. But with respect to crop production loans or specialty loans or loans to deal with no-till and other kinds of conservation techniques, I went to the banks and tried to make sure that they were lending at a fair interest rate through our agricultural linked deposit program when I was state treasurer. But we also understood that getting in the farm credit system was quite important. Before I became treasurer, they were not allowed in. And once farm credit came in, we were able to get more loans made. Matter of fact, we had the most agricultural loans made by any state in the union in the years that I was state treasurer. And then when I became lieutenant governor, one of the duties of lieutenant governor is the Rural Affairs Council, which is a very important mission. We have to make sure that folks who are growing up in rural Illinois, when their kids are coming up as well, they want to come back to their hometown. And that means we've got to have good schools. You can't have a governor who wants to slash the education budget in Illinois, who doesn't have a plan to fund our schools, and that means all of our schools, whether they're in urban areas, suburban areas, or rural areas. Investing in education is just imperative if we're going to have a strong rural economy. And I believe in that. I've done that as governor. We've, despite all the trouble we've had with respect to challenges in our budget and the Great Recession, we've maintained our investment in education. We've paid our teachers' pensions every single year that I've been governor. Before I was governor, the years beforehand, that didn't happen. They didn't pay the proper amount for a teacher's pensions. I've done it 5 straight years because I want to make sure we have good teachers everywhere in Illinois. And I also think it's important that we make sure that our schools and our healthcare system and our law enforcement system all across Illinois is connected. Connectivity. We've got to have high-speed internet for everybody. It's got to be universal. And when I was lieutenant governor, as chairman of the Rural Affairs Council, we started the Broadband Deployment Council to make sure that rural Illinois was not left out with respect to high-speed internet. And I was over at ISU a couple weeks ago, and we announced the completion of our program where we had, I think, 56 counties just here in central Illinois. We were able to invest a great deal of money to really build a system that is much quicker and accessible and universal for our schools, for our law enforcement, for our health care, for our businesses, and for our rural economy. And so I think it is important to have someone who understands that the rural standard of living, the rural way of life in Illinois is special. And the governor has to do things, whether it's investing in schools, taking care of the broadband deployment, making sure we have clean water all across our state. I was also chairman of the Illinois River Coordinating Council and worked with many, many folks in the agricultural sector on that mission of water. It is important that we understand that we don't want federal rules imposed on us that really are not well suited for us. And so I want to make sure with respect to anything that the US EPA does that we in Illinois push back if we think they are unfair rules, and we want to make sure we take care of our own situation, and we can do that in a voluntary way. When I was on the River Coordinating Council, we had many programs that were voluntary and very successful. We understood the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program that provided opportunities for those in agriculture to lay aside land and make sure that's available for conservation purposes. It's called CREP, and I want to continue that we make sure that we have those opportunities for all of those in agriculture in Illinois. I think also I want to say a word or two about the importance of dealing with natural disasters that we never welcome, but we also have to be aware that could happen. And this indeed happened, as you know, 2 years ago. I was down in Mount Vernon with Phil Nelson and folks from the Farm Bureau. We were going through a cornfield, and the farmer there showed me an ear of corn. He said, "You could put this in your salad." It was about 5 inches long or so. And we went through a very difficult drought 2 years ago. It's amazing how well we did last year on the comeback trail, and this year as well. You know, last year we grew more soybeans in Illinois than any other state in the union, by far. Matter of fact, when I looked at the statistics, 51 million bushels more of soybeans than anywhere else, and we want to keep that going. I want to thank Rod for his steadfast leadership with the Soybean Council. We not only want to grow soybeans with respect to export and feeding those who need an opportunity to eat, whether they be animals or people, but we also understand that soybeans can be used in a variety of different value-added ways. I've been on the roof of the Shed Aquarium in the state, in our state of Illinois. The Shed Aquarium is the most visited aquarium in the United States, and I was with Rich Geber when we went to Poland. I was telling them that we in the Shed Aquarium has 40 acres of Illinois soybeans on its roof, an asphalt roof that, you know, when the sun comes down a hot day like this, the asphalt soaks that in and makes the building much hotter, requires more air conditioning. But the shed, which understands how important it is to use products that come from our own backyard like soybeans, they bought a paint, soybean paint, right here in Illinois. It was called, a company called Green Products. Took 40 acres of Illinois soybeans. They converted that to a white paint. I helped put it on the asphalt there on the roof of the Shed Aquarium. I didn't get any on my shoes, and you roll it on. It's pretty easy. We've done that in some other buildings across Illinois. And what it does, that white paint, the sun reflects off the roof. And so the building actually is cooler, and they use less air conditioning. And so that's another way of having energy efficiency. And it seems to me the soybean is a miracle product. I obviously like it. George Washington Carver, I think, was hired by Henry Ford long ago to have soybean products in the Model T. So we have to understand that there's a lot of opportunities, not only for soybeans, but definitely for our corn. We were second in the country at growing corn last year. Our friends and I were a little bit ahead of us. But 16% of all the corn grown in the United States is done right here in Illinois, and I think it's important that we maintain our leadership there. We understand how important it is to get our crops to market. Want to make sure we deal with the lock and dam situation. Our state was very aggressive with respect to amendments to the WRDA Act. Having said that, we also want to look for every way we can to get our crops and our products to the markets abroad. And one interesting development is up at the intermodal around I-80 in Joliet area. You know, the trains come in from either coast with products, and we unload them and we distribute them across the Midwest. But we don't want empty train cars, rail cars, going back out to the coast. So there's grain in a box. And ADM and others have helped pioneer this. ADM is actually building an intermodal here in central Illinois. We want to work with them. I know I saw Greg Webb when I was coming in. But these intermodals offer us an opportunity with containers to put our grain in the rail cars that are going back to the West Coast or whatever coast they're going to, and it's another way of getting our products to Asian markets or other markets around the world. I think this is a very, very important mission of the governor of Illinois. I've got to be the exporter in chief. We've got to deal with other countries and leaders of other countries to show what our opportunities are, that we have great products and we know how to deliver excellent results. And so I really feel a kinship with everyone here. I've worked with everyone in agriculture in Illinois through being state treasurer and lieutenant governor and now governor. And I'm glad to be here today and look forward to answering anybody's questions you might have. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Governor. And the first question I have for you today is, the Illinois Department of Agriculture is an important part of Illinois agriculture and valuable to the consumers and giving them the safeguards and looking at the meat and poultry inspections, as well as environmental and warehouse programs, as well as weights and measures. What are your plans to make the department more viable in these tough economic times?
Well, I think it's important that we invest more in the department, in the missions you just mentioned, Rich. Our economy is a lot better today than it was 5 years ago. I think most recent statistics, our unemployment have gone down. The steepest decline in Illinois unemployment in the last 30 years has occurred in the last quarter. And that's a good thing. Our economy is not perfect. We have a long way to go, but it is a lot better. And that does help us with respect to getting revenue in order to invest. And I really believe the only way you grow is you have to invest. The idea that you pull back and starve a particular agency, such as the Department of Agriculture, not have proper personnel there, that is a very, very bad formula for success. I think we need to have a well-funded Department of Agriculture. That's why when I laid out our budget this year, I believe in a system of taxation that is based on ability to pay. That is, to me, the fairest way to go. Nobody likes paying taxes. I certainly don't. April 15th is not my favorite day. But if you have candidates, can't run for governor, who tell you you can cut the budget $8 billion, then don't expect to have good schools. Don't expect to have a well-funded Department of Agriculture for these essential public safety missions that are protecting all of us. You've got to make sure we have proper investment, and I'm committed to that. I ran an election 4 years ago. I said the same thing I'm saying today. People in our state do not want extreme, radical cuts in important things that protect life and safety. The Department of Agriculture in the state of Illinois, it has a regulatory function. It is very important for our life, our health, and our safety. And we've got to make sure we have proper resources for it.
Thank you, Governor. Another question. Livestock has been an important part of Illinois agriculture for many, many years. What will you do to support the livestock industry and the growth of that industry here in the state of Illinois?
This is a good question. You know, we're number 1 in soybeans, number 2 in corn, number 4, I believe, in hogs and across the United States. And so this is an area of growth for our state. Our Department of Agriculture does have personnel that go through the opportunities and applications of facilities for our livestock, both cattle and hogs. And matter of fact, I looked this up before coming. The number of facilities that have been approved in the last few years is actually on the rise. I think it's always important that they, go through the regulatory process and reviewed and all of that. I think everyone agrees with that. But we do understand that this is a comparative advantage we have in our state. We have feed nearby. We have transportation that's second to none. We want to increase our livestock facilities in a proper way through the Department of Agriculture. I want to make sure that those permits are done in an expeditious manner for those who wish to go forward. And to me, that's the best way to go.
Thank you, Governor. Moving our crops and our livestock to market is very important to Illinois agriculture. What are your thoughts in upgrading and keeping our infrastructure in top-notch shape so we can get the goods and products to market, whether it's export market or here in the state of Illinois?
There's no question that we always have to invest in transportation within our own state. And since I've been governor, first year I was governor, we passed a law called the Illinois Jobs Now Act to invest in our infrastructure in Illinois, particularly our roads and bridges. And we've done over 8,000 miles of new road or repairing road, I think 1,486 bridges. We can never forget that getting our product to market, we must have an excellent transportation system. Certainly the intermodals that are growing in Illinois show what happens, the jobs that happen, the opportunities that happen when we have good transportation within our own state. That includes also rail. We've also invested heavily in unsnarling some of the rail bottlenecks that we have in Illinois. And we cannot forget certainly water. And I think this is important because, as you know, when the drought came 2 years ago, then about a few months later, we had to work with the Farm Bureau and everybody here because the water was so low on the Mississippi River to get our crops to market. This is separate from the lock and dam situation. It was just so darn low because of the drought. And what I had to do was divert water from Carlisle Lake and other places to get it into the Mississippi. We went to the Corps of Engineers with great acceleration to get them to go down to Thebes, which is south of St. Louis there, to sort of smooth out the pinnacles that were there to allow our barges to get down to New Orleans and other places that we wanted to send to across the world. This was a team effort. And this is what I think Illinois at its best is. We used all of our resources, both government and folks in the agricultural sector in our state, our federal people I talk to all the time, and we were able to get through a very, very tough time. And I certainly hope we don't have that again. But it did, I think, underline to everyone how crucial our water transportation is. We have 583 miles of the Mississippi River as our border in Illinois. We have the Ohio as well and the Illinois River. Obviously, some of the locks and dams really are antiquated. The federal government moves at a snail's pace. And I think one of the answers to the question that Rich just asked is we really do have to make it clear to our federal friends in Washington that the investment in the locks and the dams pay dividends for a century. And so, moving at a slow glacial pace is not acceptable if we really want to realize the opportunities for our agriculture and Midwestern agriculture across the world. We can feed the world. We know how to do it. The productivity in our agricultural sector is so impressive. When I was at the Farm Progress Show, I was on one of the John Deere combines there, and the fellow was telling me that there is more information technology on one of those John Deere combines today than there is in the space shuttle. And so we are very, very, I think, technologically proficient. We know how to get things done in a positive way for the environment and also for productivity in agriculture. But we need to make sure we have a transportation system, particularly with water, that allows us to get our goods to the world market.
Thank you, Governor. Along those lines, we have a huge corn crop staring us in the face and a harvest, as well as both corn and soybeans. And it's going to be important that we keep our trade up with other foreign countries and our exports up. What is your views, or how can you influence, with Cuba just being 90 miles off of our coast, how can you help that open up that trade barrier doors?
Yeah, very good question. Cuba? It's interesting. If American tourists were allowed to go to Cuba, Illinois farmers would greatly benefit, because that particular country now does not have the purchasing power to purchase our agricultural exports that are desperately needed for their diet and for their way of staple of life and so on. They just don't have the purchasing power. So I really feel that this is an issue that should be addressed. The embargo with respect to Cuba, I don't think is successful. And I think allowing American tourists to visit as many other countries allow their tourists to come will help that country hopefully change their political system. We don't agree with their political system. I don't want to indicate that. But, we deal with countries like China that aren't exactly democracies, to say the least. But when Rich and I went there, we signed an agreement, a very major agreement, and ADM was part of that, to export Illinois soybeans to China. And it seems to me it's sort of unusual that a country like Cuba that could use our corn or soybeans and other specialty crops, they would buy them, and we could export them to them very quickly. We should really examine that, and I'm happy to be part of a mission to get that moving forward in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Governor. What is your view of the ethanol market with petroleum industry being so opposed to ethanol? Are you in favor of increasing E15 and higher blends here in the state when ethanol is 80 cents a gallon cheaper?
Yeah, well, I'm for E15. I've always been for that. I think that's a good way to expand the market. In Chicago, for example, I think there was an ordinance to allow for E15. It's kind of bogged down in their city council. Look forward to working with folks here to try and move that forward, not only in the city of Chicago, but our whole state of Illinois. There's no question the petroleum industry tries to throw their elbows around and rough up ethanol. I don't think that's right. There's all kinds of tax breaks and special privileges for the petroleum industry. There's one tax break that I don't think is a good one in Illinois. It allows the petroleum industry to declare oil derricks in the Gulf of Mexico to be foreign countries, and so they don't pay Illinois tax, and I don't think that's right. I think we ought to close that, and I think we ought to use those revenues to invest in our energy independence. I believe in fuel efficiency. I think everybody here does. But we also believe in a portfolio approach to our fuel. And the fact that we have ethanol in our own backyard with great success, we want to continue that. And also that byproduct, the DDGs are very, very helpful at export product as well. And so I really feel that this is something that we do need to band together on. Now, I happen to be a Democrat. My friend across the river in Iowa, Terry Branstad, is a Republican. We don't agree on everything, but on this issue of the renewable fuel standard, we are in total agreement that we don't want the federal government, as I said earlier, to be backsliding. We want to have E15. I think that is a good way to open up a market, especially, we're doing a pilot project right now in Illinois. It's a little bit more than a pilot, actually, but we're growing switchgrass in the medians in Illinois because we have a company down there near East St. Louis area, Abengoa, and a couple of other companies that are interested in cellulosic ethanol, which, we have products here that could meet the needs of cellulosic. Switchgrass would be one of them, and maybe that's another opportunity for our farm economy. But in that, again, that would be an ethanol product, a bioproduct that would help us become less dependent on any kind of foreign oil. So I'm interested in exploring that. I learned how to pronounce the word miscanthus when I was lieutenant governor. We're doing a program over at the University of Illinois. They're growing this miscanthus. It looks a little bit like bamboo. You can put it right next to kind of less fertile land next to water and things like that. It's a crop that continues to grow it's a perennial. And in Denmark, they're using miscanthus as something they put into their coal-fired plants and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunities we need to explore. I think it is important. I want to go back to the budget. For those who are advocating, this perfect world of, not having to have higher taxes, as some say, but you got to deal with the budget. If you're going to cut the budget by $8 billion, that means less money for the University of Illinois and our other universities that are doing agricultural research, and also for our students who come from rural parts of Illinois who go to the university to learn about how to make our agriculture even better. We cannot let those folks down. We've got to make sure we invest in education. I'm going to fight this campaign in the next 69 days, always saying that radical, extreme cuts in our schools is a very bad way to go for Illinois. We cannot have that. We've got to make sure we invest in, like the University of Illinois, doing this research on miscanthus, on cellulosic ethanol, and many, many more things that are very important to our Illinois agriculture and American agriculture.
Thank you. Farms and farmsteads and the land is very important to each and every farmer throughout the state. How can we as businessmen and farmers pass on our farms and our businesses to the next generation with the current Illinois estate tax laws that we have today?
Well, since I became governor, I did sign a law that gave greater exemption to Illinois farmers and families with respect to the estate tax. We have given estate tax relief, and it was major relief. We still have an estate tax, but there's a much greater exemption today than there was before I became governor. I do think we have to have a balanced system. And in dealing with this issue of the estate tax, you know, if we were here 100 years ago, and Teddy Roosevelt, who happened to be president of the United States and also a Republican, if he was here, he'd tell you the same thing I'm saying. There's a principle as old as the Bible, that taxes should be based on ability to pay. Now, if somebody has $53 million in 1 year as their income, do you think that their tax rate should be the same as a minimum wage worker? I don't think so. I don't think that's based on ability to pay. I don't think that's fair. And I think in order to get the resources necessary for a Department of whether it's education or Department of Agriculture or public safety, I was just with our public safety folks here in McLean County a few minutes ago, we have to make sure we have proper public services, and using a tax system that's based on ability to pay, to me, is much better. And I do want to say one thing about the Farm Bureau in particular. You were very helpful to us when we were trying to get pension reform in our state. Very hard issue, very difficult issue. I had to talk about that year after year until we finally got a bill passed last December. And I do want to thank the Farm Bureau for supporting that, because we want to make sure we have proper amounts of money, not only to invest in our schools, in our public safety, in our health care, and helping our veterans, the very, very important missions in life, but also, you know, when we issue our bonds to repair our transportation system, to build new schools, we have to have a bond rating, and you must have a budget that makes sense. And the last budget that I presented, the credit rating agency said this was affordable. They gave it good marks, my budget proposal. We got to pass it after the election, November 19th. It'll be quite a battle to do that, but I think we will. If I don't win on November 4th, get ready for Siberia when it comes to investment in public services. Our schools are not going to get the resources they need, and other important purposes of government are going to be left with extreme and radical cuts.
Currently, the state has a law in place that addresses hydraulic fracturing for oil. However, the rules implementing hydraulic fracturing have not been released. What are your plans for getting this economic opportunity moving for all of Illinois?
This is a very good, important issue. We have the new Albany Reservoir in southeastern Illinois in particular that is a very good opportunity for fracking and exploration. Actually, our part of that reservoir is deeper than Indiana over across the border, so there's more opportunity, I believe. I did sign the law for fracking. However, the laws of Illinois require that there be a rulemaking proceeding, and that is going on now. Under those rules, anyone can make comments, and there are literally tens of thousands of comments filed by some who don't support fracking. And I've said quite a few times that if we don't precisely go through the procedure of this rulemaking, if we don't follow all the rules and do it to a T, then, you know, these folks will go to court and try and upend the system down the road. So it's better to be patient and comprehensive now. I expect the rulemaking to be done certainly by the end of this year, probably, in the next few months. But it has to be done right. Otherwise, we're going to be legally vulnerable. And there are opportunities for fracking in our state of Illinois. Obviously, states like North Dakota have done quite well with this. But having said that, you know, we already have sand in Phil's County, LaSalle County, not far from Starved Rock, that is the best sand in the world for fracking. And it's very interesting that while some of the coal is not as much being transported by our railroad systems here in Illinois, it's more than been taken up by sand coming from our state, going to places like North Dakota and elsewhere, because it is a very, I don't know all the geology of it, but it's the best sand in the world, if you want to do fracking, comes from the land of Lincoln. And so it is important that we monitor this. I signed the law. I supported that law. We're going to implement that law. But you got to do it in a way that doesn't leave yourself with your flanks open and you're back in court a couple months from now, and the whole thing is held up.
Shifting gears a bit, Governor, what are the advantages and disadvantages of calling an Illinois Constitutional Convention to rewrite the Constitution with term limits, pension, campaign finance reform, etc.?
Well, I tried it twice. 1988, I was for a constitutional convention. It's a referendum that people vote on every 20 years. Then we tried it again in 2008. And I think now, I would say, Rich, that people are more attuned than ever to the, I'm for term limits. I was for a constitutional amendment that I passed petitions for in 1994. It was a bipartisan effort. We got almost 500,000 names. The Supreme Court said the only way you could do term limits in Illinois, and I favor term limits for legislators as well as for myself. They said you either have to get the legislature to put it on the ballot or a constitutional convention. So that's why in 2008 we were for a referendum that called for a constitutional convention. I think the areas that you mentioned, especially ethics, is another area that could use some attention in a convention. We had one in 1970, and it worked out pretty well. It's not perfect. There's some things that need improvement, but I think it is worthy of consideration. We could have a constitutional convention at any time if the legislature proposed it to the people, and that might be something that we should talk about in the coming year. I really think the Farm Bureau could help us a lot. For years, the Farm Bureau has always been very aware that we have an unfair property tax system. And I served as the commissioner of the Cook County Board of Property Tax Appeals. I did that before I was state treasurer. I got elected to that. And so for 4 years, I heard farmers and businesses and residential people talk about a very unfair property tax system, and it's no fair today. And I want to make sure we do something about it. Matter of fact, by relying more on the income tax, we can rely less on the property tax, and that's particularly helpful to our rural communities and our property taxpayers who are farmers in agriculture. So a constitutional convention could take a look at that issue, because our state constitution says that the state of Illinois is primarily responsible for funding our schools. That's what the Constitution says. But the courts have interpreted it as saying, well, that's just sort of a advice. I think it ought to be a mandate. And I think if we had that, we could dramatically reduce property taxes. We cannot have a system where you say, okay, we're going to freeze everything, and we're going to cut the income tax from here to kingdom come. Well, how do you pay for things? I was just with a group of second graders, literally, at a school, and I was kind of going through some of the basics of the Illinois budget, and one little boy stood up. He said, it doesn't add up. You cannot be radically cutting your school system, and it just isn't the right thing to do. The great thing about America, our country, and I saw that today in this parade, is that parents and adults sacrifice some of their present to help their kids' future. All those coaches, they don't get paid. They devote all their time, these baseball coaches, because of the love of the game and the love of the kids. And I think we have to have that spirit in Illinois. We have to be custodians of the future, and that's everybody's future. In rural Illinois, I don't want to give up on our small towns. That's why I was the head of the Rural Affairs Council. We tried to do everything we could to help healthcare, all those critical access hospitals in smaller towns. We want to make sure they're alive and well. And you've got to make sure that we have a proper revenue system that doesn't leave those particular institutions, the schools, the hospitals, all of those that are involved in law enforcement, without any resources. That would be very, very bad, and that isn't the American way, in my opinion. The American way is we do things that are necessary, hard things. And my mother, she's 96 years old, and when she was born in 1917, women didn't have the right to vote in our country. It wasn't until 1920. And yesterday was the anniversary of the certification of the amendment that gave women the right to vote in 1920. So our country has always been about making things better for the future. We're custodians of the future, as I said. And so it's real important that we understand that at this time in our state history, we've got to do important and bold things to make our state better. There will always be out there candidates who tell you the easy way, easy street. I'm not one of them. I'd rather tell you the truth, and I think that's the only way to go.
With the current court rulings dealing with the pension reform, what does Illinois need to do to address the pension problems that we see today?
Yeah, well, the court hasn't actually ruled on the pension reform that was passed in December of last year. The case is before the Circuit Court of Sangamon County. Ultimately, it'll go to the Supreme Court of our state. Until that is ruled upon by the Supreme Court, I think the court will uphold the law. Then, we cannot really go forward until the court gives its opinion. The legislature has voted for it. The governor, that I signed it. Now the third branch of government, the judicial branch, has to review it. That's the way our government works. And I think it is important that we have common sense pension reform that's fair to the retirees and fair to the taxpayers. And that's what we try to do with the law. Obviously, there were some people who disagreed with me on that. I've had standing bovations along the way. But if you're governor, you got to have a tough hide. You can't be one of these folks that just tell people what they want to hear. Sometimes you got to do what's necessary for the common good. And I've tried to do that every day that I've been governor, every day I've been in public life.
One more question, Governor, before we provide you an opportunity to wrap up.
Okay.
There are many local units of government in the state of Illinois. Mm-hmm. And with many different local ordinances and challenges. How can the state and local governments find a better harmony amongst each other and work together?
I do think local government is exceptionally important, particularly in rural Illinois. Our townships oftentimes are very close to folks and are very needed. So I think it's important not to have a one-size-fits-all type of approach. To me, I try to work with as many local government officials as I can, whether they be mayors or township officials, county board members. They are local and they understand their local area as good as anybody. And if you're governor, you can't cover 102 counties by yourself. You got to have people giving you sound, common sense advice. So I'm a little leery about radical efforts to just slash and eliminate governments. I'm not for eliminating the township government. I think it serves a good purpose, and I'll stand for that. And I also, as I said earlier, there are some things like, we've passed a tax code that give exemptions to important economic activities like purchasing farm machinery. I support that exemption. I don't want that eliminated, and my opponent does. And I think it's important to understand that we need to have people in Springfield who have core convictions and stand by them. And that's where I'm coming from.
Closing comments, Governor.
Okay, well, I want to thank Rich for the questions and everybody here for your attendance. It's inspiring. This is what democracy is all about. I enjoyed this opportunity 4 years ago. I just think it is the best way to bring out issues. I wish we had more town meetings and roundtables across Illinois in the next 69 days. I'm prepared to go anywhere, anytime to participate in these gatherings. I think it is important to understand that when you're a governor, you got to make tough decisions on behalf of the common good. That's what I've tried to do. You may not agree with everything that I have done. Please don't compare me to the almighty. Compare me to the alternative. That's what I would say. I think that the alternative is one that proposes a lot of easy street approaches that won't work. They'll result in less money for our schools, less money for our local law enforcement, less money for our health care, and less money for our veterans. And I was with a young man yesterday at the governor's mansion in Springfield. He was walking across the United States. He started in New Jersey. He's from Clark, New Jersey. He's walking to Santa Monica, California. I walked across Illinois. That was pretty hard in 2001. This young man, 23 years old, United States veteran, is walking across our country to bring awareness to all of us of the issues of post-traumatic stress that have visited our veterans, as well as traumatic brain injury. And his name is Eric Peters. And we had lunch at the governor's mansion. I got a chance to visit with him. He served in Afghanistan. Bob Fleiter, our director of agriculture, his son, I think, is in his second tour of duty in Afghanistan. And I think it's important that all of us, whether we're in the agricultural economy or some other part of our economy in Illinois, understand that we do have a duty. Our duty is to remember the words of Abraham Lincoln, that we have to take good care of those who have borne the battle. And take care of their families. Abraham Lincoln said that in the Civil War. It's true then, it's true today. I believe our state is the most veteran-friendly state in the Union. and we want to keep it that way. We do have to spend money to make sure that we test all of those who come back from our National Guard on very hazardous assignments. I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan. I was only there a few days. You know, these service members who are there for months at a time, if they come home and they need our help, we've got to pay for it. We can't let them down. That wouldn't be the right thing to do. So that's where I'm coming from. I really appreciate the hard work of all of those in Illinois agriculture. Our statistics on our corn production, our soybean production, our exports are really going good. We want to keep it that way. And you're the heart and soul of Illinois agriculture, and thank you very much for what you do every day. Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.